So, hello. In this week's spiritual journey, we welcome Sarah Marzillier, who is a clinical psychologist and founder of Inner Truth Psychology. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Lindsay.
So, Sarah, I was just wondering if you could start by sort of telling us how you got into psychology and where you feel your spiritual journey began.
Yes, so in terms of psychology, I finished my undergraduate psychology degree and did a PhD in psychology in research, which didn't find that interesting ultimately, to be honest, and a bit divorced from real life. So I then went to do my clinical psychology training in London. And at the time, I was kind of very interested in being a scientist practitioner, using the research, doing cognitive behavior therapy, and not particularly interested in the more kind of esoteric spiritual approaches. And I always had a little fondness for things like homeopathy, and I was always a little bit interested, but kind of thought, no, I'm a professional. I'm going to just carry on with what the profession suggests, evidence-based medicine, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then after I qualified, about a year after I qualified, I got quite a serious illness. After having a tick bite in France, I got Lyme disease, so which was it was awful. So I I had to stop my job and just trying to get better, really. And I was following all the kind of Western medicine advice and trying to improve that way. And I got so far, but not really 100% well.
Yeah.
I wasn't back at work, and I was quite low and just fed up and got more anxious, and ended up going for a regular massage with a woman. I lived in Brighton at the time, who was also a kinesiologist, and she kept saying, "Let me try this kinesiology on you." And I was like, I just want a massage. She said, just try one little bit. And so she kind of gradually got me to do it. And I found that it was really helpful. So I was like, oh, I'm actually feeling better. And I was really intrigued by the communication that the body makes through muscle testing.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's amazing, isn't it? So I was thinking, it also seemed to me that some of the communications that the body was making suggested that there was some kind of higher power or some sort of pattern to things. It wasn't just that your body was saying, I'm allergic to something. It was a little bit more than that. And I think it also opened me up to experiencing my emotions more directly because of when my kinesiologist would kind of balance the meridians, I would find that sometimes I would get a wave of emotion, and I would have a kind of almost like a flashback to what had been laid down in the meridian. So I think over that period of time, I started to open up, think, well, if this can happen, what else can happen? And then that's when I started the kind of more usual spiritual journey that a lot of people are on, and trying different things and going to groups and opening up to the whole spiritual realm, really, which was just amazing.
Because so when I was having a look at your website, there's a lot of therapies that you do which have got a lot of acronyms, and I know, and sometimes, especially like when you're just starting to sort of venture and into these different therapies and everything, it can be a bit confusing. But there was one of them which I've started hearing a little bit about, which is sort of coming into sort of mainstream therapies, if you like, and it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is also known as EMDR. So can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yes, so you can see why we call it EMDR, can't you? You wouldn't want to say that mouthful every time you talked about it. So it is a psychological therapy that was developed by a psychologist in America called Francine Shapiro. And what she discovered the story that she gives was that she was walking through a path in a forest, and she was thinking about some difficult traumatic event that happened to her. And she was looking to the left and the right side, looking at the trees either side, basically moving her eyes from left to right, and she found that she felt the emotions about that event suddenly kind of reduced quite a lot in intensity, and she didn't feel so distressed by it anymore. So she started to wonder whether there was something about moving her eyes left to right that kind of processed the memory, as she would call it, quickly, and the emotions would not feel so alive and so intense when you think about it. So that's kind of how it started. In practice, the therapy often involves the therapist will hold two fingers up and they say kind of keep your head still, and then you move the fingers actually very quickly left to right. And your job is to follow them with your eyes while you have brought the memory to mind that you might want to process something that's traumatic or distressing for you.
So it might it be a memory that you've maybe suppressed, or is it a memory that you know is there, or could it be both?
Yeah, if you'd have to, for EMDR purpose, you'd have to know that it's there already. But when you're doing the processing, you might find other aspects of the memory that you'd forgotten come up. Or you might find other memories that are kind of linked, usually in terms of a theme, might come up. And some of those you might have forgotten. It's rare that you'll have forgotten a whole memory, but it is possible for a repressed trauma to come up. So, for example, if you were working on something that happened, perhaps you're in a car crash and you felt the emotional content was feeling very vulnerable and in danger and you were very frightened, it's possible by doing EMDR, you might link to an earlier memory where you felt very vulnerable, distressed and frightened, but there may be nothing to do with the car crash. It might be a totally different kind of memory.
So would someone come to you asking for EMDR, or would it be a tool that you might use when you're treating them for potentially something else?
Sometimes people do come and ask for it because it's got quite a good media presence these days. What I usually say to people is, because I'm trained in a range of different trauma therapies, if they really want EMDR, I would probably recommend they go to somebody else, because although I can and I'm trained to do it and have done it, I tend to prefer the energy therapies for trauma because I find they're more effective and less distressing and work more quickly. So I would say to them, if you're happy to come along and let me do the assessment and see what might work for you, and then we can always do EMDR down the line if you feel like it doesn't work.
Yeah,
I've never got to a point when I've had to do EMDR in that sense. EMDR is great, and one of its really positive attributes is that it's kind of recognised as an effective treatment by the NICE guidelines, which the NHS use, and in America similar guidelines. In reality, it's quite a long procedural therapy, and you have to do this, then this, then this. And it does sometimes stop you being able to use your intuition and move with the process in the way that you might in some of the other therapies. And it takes longer. In my experience, it takes longer. Okay, so I tend to not use it as a first port of call.
Yeah. So you mentioned before the energy therapies as well. So what sort of energy therapies do you use then?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So again, I'm trained in a range. So I'm sure you've heard of the emotional freedom technique.
Yes.
EFT, up on the end of the meridians. That's great. There are some other ones like tapas acupressure technique. Have you come across that? TAT?
No, I haven't heard of that one before.
She's an American acupuncturist, Tapas Fleming, and it uses a particular set of acupressure points on the body. So it's from the back of the head and this kind of position here. There's lots of stuff online about it for free. I tend to, in my own practice, work much more using visualization and imagery and more intention-based approaches. So I don't really tend to ask people to tap on their bodies. I don't use a TAT procedure very much with my clients, so I do sometimes use it myself. But I use elements from all those trainings in the phrases and the words that I use. It's really informed by energy therapies. I tend to use more visualization, like Blue Diamond Healing from Phil Moreland.
Yeah, what's Blue Diamond Healing? I've never heard of that. It sounds really exciting.
It's really good. So Phil Moreland is probably one of the foremost energy psychologists in the UK. And he started in the field quite a long time ago, before a lot of the psychologists were aware of it. And he's been the president of the Association of Comprehensive Energy Psychology in America. So he's very experienced, and he's very intuitive and works a lot with kind of spiritual healing and multidimensional healing. And he developed, or was given, depending on your understanding of it, the Blue Diamond as a healing method. And it is a visualization approach where you imagine a blue diamond, and you can do various things with the blue diamond, and you involve the blue diamond in the healing process. And so it can be a very effective approach to heal things quickly. Yeah. And it's intention based in that you will ask the blue diamond to do some healing with you. So it doesn't, so you're kind of using your, I suppose, asking or requesting or commanding, depending on how you want to see it, within this blue diamond energy field.
I wonder if it's a bit like the violet flame. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't.
So there's a lady who I've met a couple of times. I think it's down in London I've met her. And she does something called violet flame healing. And again, she was given this just a violet flame, and it sounds very similar in terms of like the visualization and using it in different ways and incorporating it sort of in the energy healing as well.
Yes.
So with the energy healing stuff that you do, is it quite, because I can imagine like being a psychologist is a bit more science and logical based.
Yes.
Whereas with the energy stuff, do you find that gives you a chance to more use your intuitive side as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really where I come from most of all. And I have sometimes grappled with that, coming from a scientist practitioner based profession and feeling like I should be doing things a certain way, but feeling very strongly that I'm getting much better results if I work intuitively. I've moved much more to working intuitively, particularly when I left the NHS and started having my private practice. It just opened that up for me.
Yeah.
And I just, so my main way of working is intuitive. So obviously I bring all the clinical psychology background with me and how I would do the assessment and conduct the appointments really. But most of all, I'm trying to tune in intuitively to my clients and see what it feels like they're bringing, and if it feels like they're talking about a few issues, but I just kind of know that this is the issue we've got to address today. Obviously we'll check it out with them, but and then just getting a sense of the methods that I'm aware of, which one feels right. And if I follow that, I've just found that, you know, my results are just, with clients, are just so much more effective, and clients get better so much more quickly.
Yeah, because I suppose rather than using like a one size fits all approach, like you said, when you're using your intuition and you've sort of got sort of like a skeletal structure, if you like, you can sort of feel into your client, can't you, and be like, right, okay, where am I at and what do I need to do? And because I sometimes find the same, like if I have a client, I start more or less the same, but sometimes my hands go like quite high above them. Sometimes I feel like I'm pulling stuff out. Sometimes I feel like I'm wobbling. You just feel different depending on each person, and you're giving them different things. To see sort of, because you're using your intuition, like you said, and it's the results are just so much better, aren't they?
I think so, because it's, you know, otherwise you're just working blind almost, I think. So you're just like, this person's come in, they have a diagnosis of depression, therefore I'm going to look in the NICE guidelines and do CBT. Well, that might be really helpful for some people, but there may be a lot of people that, you know, what they're experiencing is a spiritual crisis, or there are problems in the relationship that really need addressing, or you know, you're just sensing there's actually something else going on that maybe on a much deeper psychological level, or you know, really a very deep spiritual level, not even within their current life's events almost, then I think that's just so helpful, rather than just trying to think, oh, I've got to do this, and doesn't feel that you're quite engaging with what they really need in the same way.
Yeah. So you mentioned before about depression, and on your website you say that depression is an opportunity.
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit more about what you mean by that?
Yes, and I would say, if you're feeling depressed when you're reading that, you know, do feel free to want to punch me in the face, because if someone said that to me, in fact, some people did say that to me when I was really ill with Lyme disease. I was just like, please go away. I'm much ruder than that. But actually, I think there is something about, if life isn't going in the right direction for you, even if you're not fully aware of that on a conscious level, then I think, you know, however you want to think of it, source, the universe, you know, God, whatever words you want to use, will usually put some barriers in your place to let you know that things aren't going right for you. And those barriers can be really unpleasant. I sometimes think of it like, if you were trying to drive to a particular place and you kept going in the wrong direction, then it's like the universe might just put road closed, you know, flooding, and you're like, I can't get to where I'm going. It's like, well, no, you're going in the wrong direction, go that direction. So things often go wrong, I think, when things aren't right for us spiritually or existentially, and then we need to stop and get off the road that we were on, and then actually really reflect a bit on who we are and what really matters to us and what our purpose is in life. And then we can, once we're on that kind of route, and we know that, especially if we know it consciously, then I just think life becomes a lot easier. Definitely. Albeit we still have our difficult times, of course.
Yeah, there's still challenges and there's still down days, but like you said, it does become, when you're on the right path and you know your purpose, it does become easier, and you tend to hit less of those roadblocks in life.
Yes, I think that's true. And also, even if you do have a bad few days, week, whatever, if you can keep in mind your purpose, you know, yes, I'm having a bad time, I'm feeling a bit unwell, or, you know, this has happened in my life, or, you know, something very difficult, like you've lost your job, your relationship's broken up, but actually you kind of know that you're moving in the right direction overall. I think you can ride those difficult bits out a lot more easily.
So just a question that I can imagine that if people are watching this, they're going to be like, I can imagine they're screaming at the screen going, but how do I know what my life purpose is? You know, it's a massive question that, you know, most of us do. We'll get to a point of like, why am I here? What, you know, what am I meant to do? Because I remember doing a meditation where I met my spirit guide, and that was one of my questions. I was like, finally, you've appeared. Why am I here? And he just said, to teach. And I was like, to teach what? And then he disappeared. And I was like, I don't feel like I know any more than I did.
More detail.
Exactly. I was like, I want a written job description, do you know what I mean, for what my life purpose is. But he wasn't giving me it. And I've explored different avenues, you know, to find it. I had a soul plan done with a lady called Jude Robinson in York.
Oh, yes. Oh, I've heard of her. Yes.
Yeah. And the soul plan was awesome. And it's very much where I currently am now, is what my life purpose is. But yeah, for the people who are watching this, what would be your sort of tips on finding out your life purpose?
I think a couple of things. I think, first of all, you're right in that my experience of working with myself with it and with clients is it tends to be not a lot of detail kind of purpose. I've never had anybody it be like, my life purpose is to go to Africa and work with children. It's never that. It's always a bit broader. It's about to teach, or so mine is to be love. That's my purpose, which is really not. It's, you know, it's lovely. But I initially thought, oh yeah, a bit more detail, but now I think that's great because you can do that anywhere.
Exactly.
So some kind of, it tends to be quite general. It does tend to be around those sort of spiritual ideas about compassion, joy, love, peace, and a kind of a quality of how you are in the world as well as what you do, or related to what you do. And the way I often find I get people in touch with in sessions is to do some deliberate work around working with what Judith Swack, who's a psychotherapist in America, calls the central identity wound. So yeah, she argues that when people come into this life, so before they've even laid down any kind of issues around the current parents and the life they got and all the stuff that happens to them, they come with a kind of wound which is usually around something about not being good enough, or being bad, or not being seen, being invisible. And that a lot of what we do in our personality is set up a kind of ego defense of that, so that we work very hard to make sure that we don't feel like that all the time. So we put other people down, which we all do at times. We try and make sure that we are seen, you know, we're popular, that people like us, or we might try and be very good at things, achieve a lot. And we put a lot of energy into what she calls kind of the defense against the central identity wounds. So you've got the wound here and you've got the defense. And if you actually work with the wound itself, which you can do using visualization and energy methods, and you can pull it out of the body, which is really interesting. You actually use it as a pull out of the body and radiate it with what she calls soul energy. And then it will disperse and disappear, and then you can usually interview the energy that's left about your life's purpose. So there's a kind of, you can get to it, basically you have to get to a kind of deeper spiritual place, really, and then you can, when you're in that place and you're calm and you're peaceful, you can ask it some questions, and it will usually tell you something about why you're here, and what kind of things you need to be, well, not what kind of things you need to be doing, but more about who you need to be or why you are here.
It sounds a bit like, the way you explain it, a bit like working with the shadow. Is that sort of similar, or is it completely different?
I don't know the working with the shadow. Is that you have to?
So, you know, like your shadow self. So but that sounds a bit like that. You know, where the more that you recognise and see your shadow side, the more that it dissipates. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm not sure if it's the same as the shadow self entirely, because I think that's a bit more partly where you put all your junk in there, all the difficult stuff. But I think it is about recognizing the wound, I suppose, and the parts that are troubled before you can get to the more kind of glowing, positive soul energy that's always there.
Yeah.
But yeah, to get there usually involves a bit of work with some of the difficult stuff. So I guess that is kind of a route through some of the shadow stuff, really.
Yeah, no, that makes more sense, because when you're in a space where, like you said, where nothing's going right, you've lost your job, you've broken up with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, you know, and you're just like, then it is difficult to be in that calm place and go, right, what is my life purpose? Why am I here? Because you're so busy unraveling everything and maybe being in a state of chaos and confusion, that it is difficult then, isn't it, to see your way out. Whereas I suppose once you start to come out of those situations and then start asking these questions when you're in a bit of a calmer place, that it's easier to be open to listening to the answers.
I think that's right. I mean, for me personally, I had to work through a lot of, you know, not going to swear there, a lot of not bad stuff before I could get to a place where I was open enough to see this kind of information. But I have found more recently working, and the Blue Diamond healing is another route in where you can actually use the Blue Diamond approach to loosen some of the holds of some of the stories that you tell yourself. So we often describe ourselves in terms of our job roles. So, for example, for me, I might describe myself as a psychologist, or you know, maybe a mother. Or we might describe ourselves in terms of our political orientation, or even something like our sexuality, or you know, and just some of the kind of the ways that we think really describes who we really are. Obviously, on a spiritual level, they don't describe that deeper part of ourselves that can vary from life to life. You know, it doesn't have to be a woman every time, or you know, a psychologist, you know, God forbid, every time. So I think there's something about being able to see beyond those descriptors. And if you've got someone that's kind of interested in spirituality, they will usually find that a little bit easier. So you can loosen the hold, really, of those ideas using a Blue Diamond technique. And I've actually got something free on my website under my free resources section, which is just 10 minutes to just do a little bit of a taste of that.
Ooh, I'm going to be going on afterwards.
And then you can just see that, and at the end it invites you to get in touch with the deeper part of yourself. Now, depending on who you are and what you're doing that day and what's going on for you and what's right for you, it doesn't mean everybody will get in touch with it doing that 10-minute meditation. But some people might, and it gives you a little bit of a sense of there's different routes you can go in to get into a place where you can ask yourself these questions. And see if you can get an answer. And if the answer will make sense to you, if it feels right, it might be a little bit of a like, oh, I didn't quite expect that, but it won't feel wrong if it's the right answer.
Because I feel like, you know, part of the reason why I do the spiritual journey and speaking to people is because there are so many different avenues and healing modalities out there, you know, for people to explore. So is there sort of like a particular client who comes to you? So if they're suffering from one particular thing, is that sort of like, are people drawn to you for a certain reason? Or
that's a good question. I don't think necessarily there are that many patterns to who comes to me. I think I've worked quite a lot with chronic health conditions, and obviously my understanding yourself, having had one, I think helps a lot. I work in the hospice as well locally, so working with bereavement and issues around death and dying, I'm very comfortable with. And I do just like working with people that are interested in spirituality, because it just makes my work easier. I do work with people that don't come and ask for that specifically. I still use my intuition, and I still use my spirituality, if you like, but I wouldn't necessarily explicitly expect them to you know, kind of take that role in the session. But I do find that people then sometimes open up to that whole idea around life's purpose, or they integrate it into their lives without explicitly calling it spiritual, which is quite interesting. So they change and they feel better and they feel like they know where they're going, but they never talk about that in terms of a spiritual dimension, and I don't obviously force that on them. So I don't quite know what sense they make of it, but often they're just happy to feel better. So like, it's great, I feel better, I'm just going to go about my week. That's fine with me, whatever they want to make of it. But working with people when they have a sense of source or God or spirituality is obviously really nice for me, because we can just explicitly talk about that, and it makes the sessions just, you know, very enjoyable.
I know, it's really interesting. I got into like a conversation with a chap on Twitter yesterday, and it was about whether he was questioning whether spirituality was based on religion. And I had to think about it for quite a long time, because I don't class myself as religious, but there are certain aspects of different religions, and I like that bit and I like that bit. And what I came up with in my mind was that for me, spirituality is based on concepts, on a variety of concepts. So like mindfulness, like gratitude, like compassion, like love, as opposed to a set of rules.
Yes.
So yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, I've started going to church quite recently with my kids, but I'm wary, like most people are. I think most people actually in the population of dogma, and that you can't do this and you'll go to hell if you're gay. And I mean, that to me is not spiritual in any real sense. It's got to be, for me, it's always got to be about love.
Yes.
That's the kind of heuristic test, isn't it? Is it about love? You know, telling someone they're going to go to hell because the people that they love doesn't make any sense to me. No, so I'm not having any of that. And that, you know, you have to do this, you have to come on Sunday and do that. You know, that kind of rules. It doesn't allow people to explore their own spirituality, because I think that's, everyone's different. And, you know, the kind of approaches that have really helped me throughout my journey, I've really enjoyed all of them. And they will all be right for different people at different times. And I guess if there's one thing that I think is really helpful for people is if they learn to trust their intuition a bit, which can, you know, it coming from where I came from, took quite a long time to get rid of all the stories around that, you know. But actually, once you do, and you think, I just feel really drawn to call in Lindsay now, you know, or actually, I don't feel like I need to book a session with Lindsay now. I feel like I want some homeopathy today. You know, then you'll be making the right decisions for you at that time, rather than just because someone said, oh, this person's really good, but they might not be what you need right now.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very good point that you bring up. I think access, and like I said, your intuition, you do have to get rid of so much stuff first before you can really start listening to yourself. And like, you know, sometimes there are days when I'm like, I don't feel like going out, and I just feel like staying in and just putting Netflix on and just chilling, which is cool, do you know what I mean? But then there's other times where I'm like, I really feel like I want to be sociable and I want to be out there, and it's just like listening to yourself, isn't it? And just trusting yourself as well is massive.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, is that sometimes you do just want a bit of downtime.
Exactly.
You know, you just want to kind of just have a lazy day and rest and just enjoy yourself, and that's great. And then other times, you want to go and do something really productive and get somewhere. And I think the more you're going to give yourself both elements, the less you feel like you're just forcing yourself to keep going at something, then the more enjoyable it is. And I do think ultimately life can be really enjoyable. I do think it's always going to have its difficult emotions and times when you're low and you're struggling, but actually generally I think the more you work with your life's purpose and your intuition, it does get a lot more fun, don't you think?
Definitely, yeah. And just like the opportunities that just arise and you're like, I didn't see this coming, I didn't plan for it, but woohoo.
That's it, exactly. You've got to be a bit open to it. I mean, if you kind of like, right, I'm definitely going to do, right, in 5 years time I'm going to have this job, and then I'm going to be a consultant, clinical psychologist, and then I'm going to get married and have 2 kids. It's like, well, then you're going to miss an awful lot of stuff that you could have done, aren't you?
Exactly. You just can't plan life at all, can you? Because you never know what's going to come, you never know what's going to arise. But yeah, it's just about enjoying the roller coaster, isn't it? The ups and as well as the downs. And I think one of the other sort of myths, if you like, around being spiritual is that you don't have any downs, but that's so not true. Because we have to have those moments where we're not feeling great, or we're feeling down, or we're upset, or we're sobbing, or whatever, to then appreciate the moments where we're laughing and we're giggling and we're feeling on top of the world, don't we?
Especially if you're kind of a person like I'm, I quite like to kind of keep working through stuff. So stuff comes up for me, I'll be like, right, I'm going to work through that now. I'm going to use this healing method or that healing method. And then, of course, stuff comes out, doesn't it? And then you feel it. You're like, oh, crikey, kind of thing. For 2 or 3 days. But then you come out of there and you're like, yeah, that was worth it. But you do have to kind of tell yourself as you're going through it sometimes, it's worth it, keep going.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, I suppose, that in terms of when things are difficult, it's still unnerving, you still feel anxious and low, but there is that overriding sense of, I know there's some purpose here, even if I can't see it right now. Even if I'm actually really angry because I don't want to be going through this right now, there's a part of me that knows I've been through something like this before. There's always a kind of reason. It always kind of makes sense at some point in the future. And so I'm just going to try and trust in that whilst I'm slightly raging against it at the same time.
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh, well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me on this spiritual journey. It's been awesome speaking with you today. So what I'll do is I'll put all your links in the description below. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you or find you, then they can come to your website and your Facebook page as well. Is that all right?
Thank you very much, Liz. I really enjoyed it.
Fabulous. Bye, Sarah.
Bye-bye then. Bye.